Hello, welcome back. Another episode of Life's a Pitch.
Episode 9.
Episode 9. Wow. Episode 9.
Who would have thought?
Come a long way. I feel like we say this every single time, but we've come a long way.
Yes, we have.
It's almost Christmas.
It's almost Christmas.
It's Christmas! Almost. Yeah, getting into the festive spirit here.
At LAP HQ.
At Life's a Pitch headquarters, we've got a tree, we've got lights, everything. No, we haven't really. We've got nothing. House is just plain. Apart from the scaffolding out front. Right, okay. So, welcome back. Episode 9. This week we have Amber Burton, who is a senior lecturer at Bournemouth University. Yeah, she was fantastic to have on. You know, she's been with us since the start of we started university.
She's
one
been
of our,
like
don't
our,
say it. Don't say
our
it.
BA honours in advertising mum.
No, you weren't there. Oh God.
She's carried us right from when we've got
it.
into this crazy journey, right until the day we are recording this.
Oh God, I'm so sorry.
She's great.
She's someone who we wanted to have on for a while.
Yep.
It was great to have her on. Finally get her on to chat to her.
Yeah, it was a really good chat.
Really engaging sort of talk and really sort of...
I think one thing that I liked about it is that we got to talk a little bit more than we normally do because Amber had quite a few good questions for us.
Yeah, it was a lot more sort of conversationalist, three-way conversational talking rather than just us talking at someone else. And then, it was something a little bit different. Yeah. Anything you want to add?
No?
No. Wicked. I'm going to bring that word back. No one says wicked enough anymore. Okay.
Damn!
Damn, son! Hit it!
No, keep it professional,
Yeah, of course. Focus.
Focus.
Episode 9. Here it comes.
Enjoy.
Hello. Welcome back. Another episode of Life's a Pitch. We're in the media school today. A little bit of a different location. I am sad to say that it's quite grey and murky outside. We have to report the weather every time we're on. Today we're lucky to be joined by Amber Burton, who is a senior lecturer. That's correct. I said that last time for David. So a senior lecturer at Bournemouth University. Someone we've pestered her to try and get her on.
Right from the start.
Right from the start. Definitely. Amber, hello, welcome. Thank you for coming on. How are you?
I'm very well, and thank you for inviting me. And pester power obviously works.
Yeah, it works. It does work. There's your lesson. If you want to get off someone, just annoy them.
Annoy them. Bug them.
Right. Okay, so we wanted to begin like we do with every guest. We'd like to get you to tell us your story.
My story?
Yes.
Are you sure? This may take some time.
That's perfectly fine.
Sit back, put your slippers on, smoke a pipe. That's how you're inclined. Blimey, that's a leading question. Well, let's start with today. I am a senior lecturer as opposed to my colleague David Alder, who's just a lecturer. I just want to make that point. I am a senior lecturer. And today it's Wednesday, and so today brings me the delight of leading students in digital futures studies, and a bit later on, students working on psychology of the media. I'm fascinated by advertising. I'm fascinated by the stuff that we do when we come into contact with the media and with advertising particularly. And I also bang on and on and on about digital stuff. So that these are the things, this is my story for being in the media school. Wider story, it took me a long time to get here. I never expected to be an academic. My background is all practitioner, and it's a very different world. I feel like I've come over to the dark side by coming into academia.
Why Bournemouth?
Why Bournemouth?
Why Bournemouth? Why BU?
Wow, these are existential questions that are a bit tough for a Wednesday morning. I ask myself this question every morning. I'm in Bournemouth by accident. I was actually born in Mansfield, which is Middle England, about as Middle England as you can get, and spent my formative years in Llanelli in South Wales. So yes, I can speak a bit of Welsh, particularly when I'm drunk. And I came to Bournemouth by accident. My first degree was when Bournemouth wasn't Bournemouth University, but the Dorset Institute of Higher Education. I did one of the first media degrees in the country. It was validated by Southampton University, and I sort of hung around really like a bad smell. I couldn't get away. I was meant to go off around the world and be a journalist, and be travelling through Europe and then Asia, and then come back round the other way and spend all of my time doing that. And the original plan was to be a journalist. But I had an unfortunate encounter with a chap called Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness in Northern Ireland in the mid-80s, which sort of put me off journalism for a long time. And I thought I'd go to the lesser evil, which is advertising. And I haven't looked back since.
We had you as a lecturer in first year, and of course we've always sort of been around each other, all of us, throughout the course, throughout the whole time. And you taught us our first ever unit that we ever learned, which was the fundamentals of advertising. And
what a great unit.
Yeah, right at the
was it?
great way to kick us off.
Yeah, great unit.
Good.
And from just that unit, I got to realise that your teaching style is quite different to others, and it's quite one-to-one. And no, it's a good thing.
Okay.
I think it's really good. So we were wondering, where did you get your, or have you taken inspiration from anyone to develop your teaching style?
What an interesting question. Do you know, I've never really thought about it. It's never been a plan to teach in a particular way. I've always felt, and I learned this the hard way as a practitioner, when you go and pitch to business, particularly from a small company, which is what I was running at the time, you have to work very hard to get people to, and you understand very quickly that people buy people, and if you can't get on with the people in front of you or the people that you're talking to, then you've got a serious problem. And I think that's, if I have a philosophy of teaching, that makes it sound very grand, because I really don't. But if I did, then I think that would be it, that you are in the room with other individuals, other human beings who have their own agency, their own stories, their own motivations for being there. And the best you can hope for is you can connect with them in some way. And that's what I try and do. And you treat people in the room as equals to you, and you go from there. And I think, you mentioned fundamentals of advertising. I learned as much teaching that unit as you guys did being in the room with me. And I think if you approach teaching with that kind of mindset, that this is a learning experience for everybody, and nobody's got all the answers, then that's quite freeing. It's quite liberating. You think, do you know what? I don't have to have all the answers here. We can find the answers together. I think that would be the underpinning. Have I taken inspiration from anybody? Well, like most people, I went through secondary school and had great teachers and absolutely crap teachers. And you learn from both, don't you? You learn from the great teachers. You think, one day when I grow up, I'm going to be like that person. And the crap teachers, one day when I grow up, I'm absolutely not going to be like that person. Although I have found myself saying things that crap teachers have said to me in the past. It's like some sort of Freudian re-expression of, I've actually heard myself say to students, just do it because, which is what my old history teacher used to say to me. I think if anybody inspires me, I've always said, and it's on all my profiles, when I grow up, I want to be Judge Judy. I really like her no nonsense, cut the bullshit, let's get on with it, let's treat each other as human beings and stop fannying about, and I quite like that.
You mentioned at the beginning of the first answer, you mentioned you're interested in the relationship between sort of people and media and advertising. Yes. Why? What do you think has fueled that interest in you?
Well, we spend so much of our time watching the bloody stuff that, if it's not interesting, if it doesn't tell us something about who we are as individuals and who we are collectively, then something's wrong. Something is seriously wrong. And we know, if we read the Daily Mail and other bastions of free speech and free press, then we understand that we're all a nation of couch potatoes, and we're all being subsumed into a culture of, very low culture of poor media and fake news and post-truth eras. And I think if we don't take notice of what's going on in the content and the form of the media that we consume, then we're in trouble. I think we do need to take notice. We do need to spot where the rot is and also spot where the good stuff is, and see if that can explain some of the weird things we do. There must be an explanation for putting old farty pants in as president-elect. in the USA, and there must be a reason why half of the people in this country have voted for us to opt out of moving forward in a European market. So where are those reasons coming from? Where are we getting our information from? And I think now more than ever, we need to try and grasp hold of some of this slippery stuff and sort out what is going on. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's endlessly challenging and endlessly fascinating in equal measures.
So was it always the fact that you were always interested in advertising that caused you to go into academia? Did you always feel like you wanted to sort of give back to?
I didn't sort of sit up one morning and say, do you know what, advertising is where I'm at, and when I'm 50 years old, I'm going to be teaching advertising. That was never ever the plan. I don't think teaching was ever the plan. It happened by accident. But advertising it's one of those things. It's a bit like car crash TV. You know you shouldn't watch it, but you can't help yourself. And I think advertising gives us that wonderful opportunity, these tiny little 2 minute or 1 minute or fleeting moments of insight into how we feel about ourselves as individuals and as part of a bigger collective. And I think the thing that got me about advertising was a realisation quite some time ago that everything in an ad is there for a reason. There are no mistakes in advertising. In the actual content, in the actual subject. There are no mistakes. It's a perfectly formed, perfectly crafted piece of content, which begs the question, what is it trying to do? In what way is it? Is it manipulative? Is it exploitative? Is it nice to look at? Is it pleasing? Of course it is. One of the elements in there that really connect with the viewer or with the listener or with the person who's actually engaging with it. And I don't think we have the answers. I mean, I've heard colleagues tell me in the past that they understand how advertising works, but I don't think we do. And I don't think it's that easy. I think it's an endlessly fascinating and challenging subject.
And speaking more about the actual course we're on right now, that you're part of teaching.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're students that are right now in our final year, and we're hoping to transition from university straight into the industry. In your opinion, what is your feeling behind that transition? Do you think people are getting enough out of a university course to actually go into the industry and make a name for themselves right now?
Can I answer your question with another question?
Yeah.
Is that what you want? Do you want to leave? Do you want to stop being a student and start being an employee straight away? Is that what you want? Is that the plan?
From a personal point of view, I feel like because after working on my placement year, I really enjoyed working and not being a student. And now I feel like, and obviously the transition is completely different and it's really hard to get into that mindset. But I feel like after 4 years and a lot of years before that in education, although I don't feel like I've learned everything, I think I've learned enough to go into a field and then start learning there.
I think one of the interesting things about the degree that you're on, which is in advertising, is it doesn't automatically mean go into a career in advertising, unless, of course, that's what you want. And as you guys know, you've heard it over and over again, it's a competitive and pretty saturated market, and you've got to be very good or very lucky, or probably a combination of both, to get what we would call a classic advertising job, especially immediately after graduating. I think you probably have to go through various rites of passage to land the job that you want. And I'm not going to repeat the endless and very varied advice that's out there on how to do that. But what I would say is that if you've done the degree with an open mind and you've thought, particularly in your final year, about the other applications of the stuff that you're learning, then I think the world is your oyster, to use a cliche. I think there are lots of possibilities and you guys are good at the whole lateral thinking, let's, instead of going in just one direction, let's think about what the other possibilities are. Let's brainstorm it out and see whether there are other things that and the stuff that you have done as core and as optional on your degree will give you inroads into lots and lots of other things that you perhaps are not really aware of. They may not be on your radar right now. Right. And it's impossible to predict what they may be. But when I've had guest speakers come back who are ex-students and they've told us their stories about where they've got to where they are and the sorts of things that they're specialising in and the sorts of things that interest them and give them a good career, a fulfilling career, are not predictable. They're not, we could never have predicted, for example, that an entry point job in our communications industry in the UK is digital. We couldn't have predicted that 10 years ago, and yet it is. And if you can't speak digital, then you've got a bit of an issue. Even if you decide you're never going to be that digital person, you need to be able to speak the language. And I think you guys have got some of that language. So it's a question now about sort of broadening the horizon, I think, a little bit, and thinking about where else can some of this interest, what is it that really, what gets me out of bed in the morning, what's the problem I like to solve, what is the thing that I like to talk about, and don't just aim for your classic creative job or your classic account management job or your classic media planning job. They're there, but I think there's other and more interesting positions to go for.
So we've touched a little bit about your sort of educational background. What do you look for in students? You know, we talked about your teaching style and how you try to make that human connection, but what do you look for coming back to you?
Jed, the best thing, the thing that puts a smile on my face is a student who is just curiosity. The student who isn't convinced that everything that needs to be said about a subject has been said in a lecture, that there is much more there, and that there are things to go out and get really interested in and become experts in. I think the student who wants to be an expert in something really specific, for me, that's really exciting. That means that there's growth and there's development there, that student is changing. So curiosity and being challenged. And I've become very, if I'm ever demoralised, it's when I deliver a set of facts to students and they won't challenge me and they won't say, well, actually, does that work in all scenarios, or is that absolutely true? And how do you know it's absolutely true? Because there's no such thing as absolute truth, of course. But yeah, curiosity, and I know it killed the cat, but I think curiosity is totally underrated. But it's very risky, and I get that students don't want to take risks, particularly the closer you get to graduating. You don't want to take the risk of being curious. You want to have the certainty that you've got it nailed, and you're doing the right thing, and you're meeting the marking criteria. And of course, we want that for you too. Mm-hmm. But that's really not where it's sexy. Where it's sexy is where you have a student who just stands in your office waving their arms around because they've discovered something new for themselves. And that makes up for an awful lot of crud that goes on in being an academic as well. Yeah, so insatiable curiosity is the route to my heart.
Just before that, you touched upon your interest in digital.
Yes.
And how you have a very keen interest in digital.
Yes.
And I was wondering,
It's not so much an interest, it's more a compulsion. It's more, I can't leave the bloody stuff alone. I'm teaching digital futures this term for final year students. This is an optional unit. And the remit is can we predict what's coming down the line in 2 years' time? So, of course, that gets us into all sorts of really interesting avenues, for everything from virtual reality and augmented reality all the way through to the problems with big data, and we're all dating and getting married via webcam and databases and all the rest of it. And you just have to start wondering what that means to us as individuals and to us culturally and socially, and what changes, if any, are in place, and whether actually we've done it all before. It's all happened before. Mm-hmm. So there are endless circular debates around this stuff, and it's fascinating. Mm-hmm. But it's not so much. It's almost in spite of myself. I know it's a compulsion. It's almost unhealthy, my interest in how we might be able to use this stuff in whatever sphere. I'm sorry, I jumped straight in and didn't let you ask your question.
No, I was just going to say, what's one thing that has surprised you about digital in advertising in particular, and one thing that you didn't expect, or is it just a constant thing of surprises that new things keep coming up? And
digital, the execution of digital, in the sense of what we can do with it, I've been constantly disappointed by. I am yet to be completely swept off my feet by a campaign using digital in a really creative way that makes the most of that platform.
So how would you say that could be done?
Well, first of all, by not treating it as a separate channel, and I think it's very easy to say, well, digital is one channel and then TV is another, and etc. etc. I think digital is probably the glue that holds it all together, and allows you to take the other channels even further. And the fact that we teach it in silos and students experience it in silos, and practitioners. You have your digital agency, which is not the same as a full service agency. I think that's where all the problems are. Maybe in 5 years' time, maybe there won't be those distinctions, and we won't be talking about digital in its own right, but it'll be embedded in everything else that's going on. Maybe then we'll start to see some really intelligent applications of digital. But until recently, or until today, I think it's all been a little bit sort of, well, it's cheap, it's cheerful, and it gives us lots of big numbers. Bob's your uncle. It works, but all we've got is a cheaper version of communicating with a lot of numbers attached, most of whom, as we've seen in what's happened with elections recently, most of those numbers have not been right, or they've been misleading, or they've been vulnerable to all of the bias that human beings bring to big data sets that they can't actually, that are difficult to compute, or difficult to understand rather, not compute, they're very easy to compute. So yeah, I'm waiting to be swept off my feet.
Have you seen any so far, any at all, that you have looked at and you've gone, that has been done well, but maybe not as well as it could have been done?
Well, it's just one example. I'm not holding this up as a sort of a bastion or a best example. One example is I've looked at virtual reality branded content very recently and been talking to an agency about their application of it for some big name brands. And virtual reality it's got a few barriers, one of which is the kit. Although you can get, cardboard headsets of VR for £4 from Asda if you're really interested. You just stick your phone in it, you download some content from YouTube. This is something anybody can do. You stick your headset on and you can experience this immersive world, this surrounding world. And if you plug in some headphones and the content is even more immersive, then you can have really quite an interesting, stimulating experience that sinks you into the world that you've asked for. And of course, brands are getting really excited about this. And this is, wow, we can do lots of, this is the holy grail of advertising. If we can put the individual in the brand, we've got it sorted. The problem is the tech. There is, there's this idea of diffusion of innovation, which really models how ready people are to accept the barriers of technology. You have to learn how to use it, you have to acquire it, you have to put it on, and that in itself is a bit of an issue. But let's say we get past that, because we got past that with our smartphones, we could get past it with the VR kit. The problem you then have is the experience itself. And I don't know whether you've tried VR, but when you've got all the kit on and you're in it, it's a very solo individual experience. You're having a great time, but you look like an idiot to anybody watching you. And the person watching you isn't sharing that great time. It doesn't see what you see. So the problem that brands have is, how do we make this shareable? How do we make this a shared experience? And then how do we develop reach behind that? Because if we've only got a few people at any one given point having that fantastic immersive experience, how do we roll that out so lots of people have it and lots of people can share that experience or have different versions of that experience? So it's great technology and it holds lots of potential, but we are way away from using it in a way that would actually make sense in commercial terms, or even in cultural terms, because we're social creatures and we want to share this stuff, and we can't share virtual reality at the moment.
Okay, so we talked a bit about your educational background, and I want to talk about something else, because I remember sitting down with him before we started this. And we are aware of the gender imbalance in the industry and in advertising, and we agree with it. It's on our mind. We keep seeing these stats like 3% of females are creative directors, and then you hear comments by Kevin Roberts, who in the summer said what you said. Not going to repeat it. We just wanted to get your opinions on women in advertising in the industry and how they're portrayed.
My opinion on women advertising is there's not enough, particularly at this, as sort of you get higher up the hierarchies and the levels. There aren't enough. I mean, that's just a bold fact. Why there aren't enough and what we can do about it? Contentious. I could spend quite some time talking about that. I think what troubles me is that it's perpetuated throughout the industry that if you are going to be a fantastic advertiser, particularly in creative terms, then you need to be in possession of a willy. And that is borne out by the stats around how many creative directors are female and how many are male. But unfortunately, we perpetuate it even here in Bournemouth University and even on our degree. So, for example, we have many of my colleagues who would identify themselves as advertising lecturers are male. and there's very few that are female. In fact, our first year advertising students this year, out of their 6 units, 5 of those units are being taught and led by men. Now that would suggest, wouldn't it, without actually saying it, and this is the problem, it's the between the lines stuff, it's the underlying message that's coming through, is that in order to be good in advertising, in order to know what you're doing in advertising, you have to be male. So that's a problem in terms of the industry. In terms of how women are represented in advertising, well,
how do you think we can change that? How do you think we can fix that problem?
I just want to say that as far as I've seen on our course right now, there are way more girls than there are boys.
Actually, students, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
So do you think that's sort of helping it in a way right now? The more students that are actually studying the subject are women.
It's helping in the sense of, quantity of numbers. But if you look at then where those women go and where the men go, and you look at 5 years down the line, who's being employed where. Mm-hmm. I only know this anecdotally. I don't know the hard numbers behind this. But the individuals who end up in classic advertising jobs on the creative side, the ones that we know of, the ones that win the pencils, and the ones who go on and become really quite celebrated in their own right, they tend to be male. We tend to hear about the men. The women go on and be as successful, but they tend to be in those roles that are not quite so limelight led. Right. So they'll be in media planning, or they'll be working in the digital teams behind the scenes, rather than being at the forefront of going in for creative pitches. And we see that quite a lot, and I think we probably see that not just in advertising, but in a lot of different industries. That one industry which completely caught me by surprise very recently, and I mentioned it in a lecture very recently, is that out of all the sectors, you think, for example, the hairdressing sector would be the one that would be completely dominated and rocked by women. Yeah. That you would have mostly women employed in the sector, and they do. About 80% of people employed in the sector are females. But the awards, the people who come to the top of the hairdressing world and are celebrated for their creativity and for their skill and their technique, for the past 10 years, the winners of those awards have all been male. You have to ask the question: what's happened there? What is the gap there? And the industry pundits will tell you that women are so busy getting on with the job and doing the job that they're not very good at promoting themselves and saying, "Hey, I'm a better hairdresser than you are," and pushing themselves forward. And the stereotype, the assumption underlying that is that men are better at shouting about their prowess and about how good they are, and women are not. They're slightly more reticent about doing it. And I wonder if the same thing is happening in the advertising world. The other bugbear in the advertising world is that, particularly for women, but I think for men as well, in the advertising world, you're only really as good as your face. And if you're not of an acceptable size, shape, skin colour, gender, then those old norms, the normalisation of we recruit those who look like us, I'm afraid comes into play with the advertising industry as much as it does in the broader communications industry. So there's a cultural embedded problem that comes with patriarchy and comes with the sense that we always want to be talking to people who look like ourselves. And you'd think the advertising industry, with all its capacity for problem solving and with its ability to step outside of what we would consider norms, you'd think that would be the industry that would be able to take this by the short and curlies and do something with it, and doesn't seem able to do so. And comments like we heard in the summer sort of reinforce the idea that nobody really thinks there's a problem, and so that problem isn't going to get solved. Certainly not in a hurry.
He gave an interview recently to a paper in New Zealand. Have you had a chance to read it?
No.
So I read it. I watched it last night. I read it last night. It's quite an interesting one. I think he said he was misquoted, obviously, and he goes what he meant to say was the gender debate in the industry is over because we should be doing something about it, not just talking about it.
Well, that's quite a U-turn, isn't it? That from denial to I didn't really deny it, and yes, of course we should be doing something about it. And it's easy to use those words as well. So did he back that up with anything concrete?
Not particularly, no. The interviewer talked about his book, which he was plugging at the time, and how only 7 of the people within the book of inspiration to him only 7 were women.
Right.
And he said that wasn't a conscious thing. You know, I didn't think about that. Seeing it now, it probably wasn't the best thing to do. And then he went to talk about how Saatchi employs, I think, a high number of female creatives, and how their worldwide creative director is a woman. And yeah, I just thought it was interesting.
That sounds a bit defensive. And you also use the word, or he used the word, you're quoting him, conscious. I think conscious and unconscious bias plays a big role in this. And if he's experienced a wake-up moment of, oh yeah, I might actually have been doing this without realising, or I may actually have had an unconscious bias. Not that I'm excusing him, because he's well-paid and one would assume well-educated man of the world. This isn't excusing him at all, but he may well have been part of that trap that is around unconscious and conscious bias. And again, that goes back to, we hire those that we have faith in, that look like us, that we think are a safe pair of hands. And that is invariably, if you're a white older male, that's invariably another white older male.
Bodes well for us then.
Do you have any questions for us?
Yes, I do.
Oh, that was a mistake.
Looking back, I mean, you haven't quite graduated yet, but looking back over your experience of advertising, your placements and what you've done, and do you remember your initial expectations when you first arrived here, when you first walked through the doors in that September 3 years ago?
Long time ago.
I do, yeah.
Do you?
Yeah.
What were your expectations?
Well, because I came from India and I was coming to a new country into a course that I never really thought of doing advertising when I was picking my unis. And I picked because I was solely focused on doing art and painting, and that was like what I wanted to do. And then one of my counsellor at the time was like, you can't just apply to art unis because you might not want to do that once you get it. So I decided to apply to Bournemouth and do advertising, because I thought advertising was quite interesting, but I never really actively had an interest in it at that point. And so when the decision came to be, I decided that I couldn't paint for 4 years because I thought it was really boring at the time. And then I decided to do this, and coming in, I didn't really know. I knew what advertising was. I didn't know the detail of it, and I didn't know how stressful or creative or how you had to be so snappy with coming up with ideas. I didn't know any of that was a part of it. And I'm glad I do now, because I feel like I've learned a lot that I probably would have never done if I came in with a closed mind. I did come in with an open mind, just willing to learn everything, accepting a new culture and everything like that.
Right.
So I think for me, I remember it was stressful at first coming in, but I think I got on quite well. I think England's a good country, so I think I got accepted quite easily.
Hope, not on recent evidence, but one would hope.
No, yeah.
So, do you ever regret not following the art route then?
I don't, because I've always had like an interest in understanding people and understanding consumers, and I always had an interest in economics and stuff like that. And I also had an interest in art and painting and visual art, but I sort of, because I didn't know which one to pick, I sort of wanted something that sort of got both meshed up together. And I think advertising does that quite well, because you get that creative side and you also get the strategy, planning, all of that mixed up together.
It's art and science balanced.
Yeah, art and science, yeah, sort of.
Oh, I didn't give you that horrible essay in your first year, did I?
I don't think so.
I set a really nasty essay, but it probably is maybe before your time, which is advertising an art or a science, which if ever was designed to torture a first year student, then that would be it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you missed that. Maybe I'll set that as a final. I'll get Jill to put it in the core unit next year.
Oh no.
Just to see how you go. Okay. What about you?
Yeah, I don't really know how to say this without sounding all preachy and choiry. I hate talking like this stuff, but so I kind of fell into this by an accident, by mistake, by failing actually. So I didn't do that well at school. I was never that academic. I never studied that hard. I sort of half-assed my way through secondary school, and GCSEs came round, and I thought, I'll do it later. And I scraped by. I got 6 GCSEs, I think. I got 7. And it was kind of, okay, now what? Now what do I do? Where do I go? And, you got parents telling you, become a physio, become a physiotherapist, why don't you become a teacher? Why don't you do this? And that was originally where we were going to go. And then I realised, hang on a minute, maybe that's not the way to go. Maybe I don't want to do that. Why don't I go and do like a business? I did a business BTEC, and then that sort of led to being here. And I didn't know what to expect. I mean, I built it up in my mind. You know, people say, "Oh, university's gonna be the best 4 years of your life. You're gonna love it. It's gonna be amazing. You're gonna,
I was quite scared coming into you.
Yeah, I was terrified because I'd never been to Bournemouth. I didn't come down for an open day. I just thought I'd wing it, and I thought, it was an opportunity that scared me, and I always try to take an opportunity which scares you a little bit because it means something. I mean, that's why I applied for a PAL leader in the first year. Mm-hmm. I didn't get it, obviously, but that led me on to the Advertising Society, and that was an amazing decision because that's what eventually led to this podcast. So I guess I also came into it with an open mind, didn't know what to expect. Just thought, try and experience it all and try to learn. And
what advice would you both give students who are joining the advertising course in September?
That's a difficult one.
I'd probably say, like I said before, everything that's taught to you, especially in your first year, you might think it's not really what I signed up for.
Yeah.
But it is very, very useful, and you will realise that when you do the big jump to second year, when you start working on your placement, and when you do the huge jump to final year, you realise all the stuff that you're taught, everything is so important, and you might forget some of it, but the things that you remember will come in handy eventually.
Okay.
So that would be my advice. Just
interesting.
Accept everything.
Everything is about advertising. I sat in a meeting very recently with some student reps and asked them to feed back to us how they were getting on with their courses. And there was a lot of, we're not sure that this bit is relevant, and we know that bit's relevant. And I do wonder, how do we know? How do I know what's relevant? Certainly, how does a student know what's relevant? Because you're not at a point yet where you can make decisions about relevancy and appropriateness. And actually, advertising, one of the truly interesting things about advertising is that everything is interesting, everything is applicable, everything is relevant. You don't really understand advertising if you can't understand people. And people are what we study on this course. How about you? What sort of advice would you offer a first year student?
I thought I was going to get away with this.
No.
Oh God, I don't know.
I'm marking you. I've got my red pen out.
I'm never very
out
good.
Of 100.
I'm never very good at giving advice. I give horrible advice. Just come into it with an open mind. I mean, you're not in school anymore, so you don't have to just sit there and accept everything the lecturer says. You've touched on it before. You're paying $9,000 probably. You're paying what? $9,000, $9,500 now. This is your money. This is your education. You can come into it and you can question them and you can say, well, I don't agree with that. Well, what makes you say that? I think I've seen that a lot as well. I think we were discussing it earlier. I was discussing with someone else that a lot of students come in and they're still stuck in their school mindset. Like, I can't question the lecturer. They know everything. I'm still guilty of that. Like, I still take everything the lecturer says gospel. But at the same time, just get out of that little childish school mindset. Come in, question everything.
Go into it with an open, curious mind.
Make the most of it. It's your money.
I think the disappointing thing is the focus on money, and I understand where it comes from, and I understand that $9,000 a year is a lot of money, and it's not just $9,000, it's everything else. And I was absolutely blessed, and I know it to be a blessing that I didn't have to pay for my tuition, my degree when I did mine. And I think that's at the heart of the problem. The fact that students are expected to pay back their tuition fees completely changes the relationship. In the classroom and the relationship that the student has with studies and learning. And it's not become something now that you do for the hell of it because you love learning. It's now become very commercialised, and we've got a pound sign on every lecture and every minute we spend in seminars. And I think that's very sad, very disappointing. And those students who can acknowledge that and then step above it, step outside it anyway, and still enjoy the learning, I think they are to be admired and congratulated for doing so.
What about the bankers?
What about the wankers?
Oh, God.
We have our banker questions.
What's your banker question?
Our banker questions are... Well, we have two questions that we ask every guest that come on our podcast.
I'm taking the watch off.
God.
Okay. So the first banker is to give us your elevator pitch.
My elevator pitch?
You got 10 seconds.
You got 10 seconds to sell yourself.
Watch is off.
You take me as you see me, and you hear the words that I say.
That was 5 seconds.
That's all you're getting.
Amazing.
I'm not doing an elevator pitch.
Right, okay. Second banker would be, could you sum up your career in 3 words?
Oh, hell.
That's 2.
My career, in 3 words: confused, exhilarating. The last one's difficult. Flawed.
Let's not go any further. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for chatting to us and taking time out of your day to just to talk to us. Very, very eye-opening as always, and very enlightening. And just lovely to see you again.
Oh, thank you.
I don't see you enough.
That's very sweet.
I was going to say that.
No, most of this term I've been stomping around being grumpy because I've had a lot of teaching to do. So I apologise for any grumpiness that may have come your way.
You were delightful.
But it's my pleasure. Thank you for this.
Amazing. See you guys next week. Here comes the jingle. Boosh.